am thrilled to introduce to you today the closing panel on third parties assessing and improving ethics and compliance across third parties. We've got a great panel today. I'd like to now ask them to join me as they turn their videos on to join the main stage. Robert is going to be leading today's conversation, and I will turn the floor over to him to allow you to introduce you to both Kim and Patricia. The floor is now all yours.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. My name is Bob Mascola. I'm very pleased to moderate this panel discussion with Patricia and Kim on third-party risks. I was previously with Barrick Gold, a Toronto-based company that many of you know, and now I'm in New York, heading up the compliance programs, graduate programs at Fordham Law School, so a bit of a change. So what we want to do today, though, is hear from our guests and how they're managing third-party risks. So what I'd like to do just to start out with is have you, Pat, and you, Kim, introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into the questioning. As with the other sessions, if you have questions along the way, please use the chat feature, which we'll be monitoring, and we will maybe take some breaks along the way to answer some questions. But with that, let me get started and go to you, Patricia. Could you just introduce yourself? We're not hearing you. So I'm not sure if there's some technical support, maybe your mic.
Is it better now?
Now it's on, yes, go ahead.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm sorry, what was your question again, Robert? It's not starting well, so just tell me.
No, I just a general introduce yourself, yes. Your company, your role.
Okay, good. Yes, thanks. So my name is Patricia Aline. I work for SNC-Lavalin. Okay, I'm really sorry, but I hear like such a delay. I can't understand anything.
Well, let me see if, well, we're going to have to adapt on the fly. I'm not sure if we can get some technical support on the end, but I'm going to, in the meantime, and maybe if you could close out of your other tabs, and that might be the reason, Patricia, that you're having some difficulty. But while you're working on that, I'm going to move over to Kim from one of our sponsors. But go ahead, Kim, if you could just introduce yourself.
Sure. Kim Urbanchuk. I'm Parsons Chief Ethics and Compliance Counsel. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been with Parsons for about 2 years, and my remit includes ethics, anti-corruption, trade, some personal data privacy, and political contributions and related matters. Prior to coming on board with Parsons, I was running the ethics and anti-corruption program for Airbus in the North American region. Prior to that, I was with the government for the balance of my career in various roles, ethics attorney for USDOT. I was on the Hill for a little bit, and I was a prosecutor is how I started my career. So it was a long and winding road to where I am today, but happy to be here and happy to be on this panel with all of you.
Great.
I think my thing is fixed now. It's because I had 2 tabs open. So thank you for your help, everyone. So my name is Patricia. I'm responsible for the integrity program at SNC-Lavalin, who's an engineering firm here in Canada and also all over the world. I've been responsible for the integrity program since December 2017 or 2016. The time flies past so fast at SNC. We're so always busy with things. My background is actually more in organizational development. So from more HR perspective, I came into this role with having a focus on how can we strengthen and reinforce our culture of integrity within the within SNC-Lavalin. So my experience with the subject that we were talking about today is since 2015, actually, where I started to be responsible for training, culture development, and also after that as a compliance officer for the mining sector of SNC-Lavalin.
Great, fantastic. So let's just start with having you both talk at a high level about your third-party risk programs. And, you know, that's a very big topic. And maybe if we could just start on the vendor side, and we'll see how far we get, just to narrow the scope of it a little bit. Kim, can you just talk a little bit about how your program is set up to manage third-party risks on the vendor side? And by that I mean, you know, what are the risk domains that you are looking for? What are the processes that you have in place, and who owns the processes?
Sure. So we actually recently made some updates to our anti-corruption and third-party due diligence process and policies and procedures. So for Parsons, you know, we're also an engineering firm, and we also work quite a bit with the U.S. federal government and other governments around the world on critical infrastructure, defense, and intelligence markets. We've recently also had some acquisitions where we are getting into products, which is a new kind of new area for us. So we sort of looked at our due diligence program and have really refocused on a risk-based approach in terms of what the partner is doing for us, where they're doing it, and sort of what the true nature of that relationship is. So we focus a lot on our agents. Another new thing for us is channel partners and resellers. We're getting into that space. I suppose in terms of ownership, I guess the legal department, myself and my boss, the general counsel, own the process and procedure, but it's really, you know, compliance is kind of everyone's job, right? It's the business is incredibly engaged in third-party monitoring of those relationships. So sort of on a basic level, we have a sliding scale of sort of the amount of diligence that our third parties receive. So if you're an agent, you're out there representing us, you know, sales or lobbying or in some other way engaging in representative services, that's going to be our highest level of due diligence, where we do sort of a full scope background report. We look for red flags, we do interviews, we do training. And then down to sort of our simple, what I would call non-executable vendors that are supplying us with sort of, you know, paper, office supplies, those types of things, will get, they'll be onboarded through procurement. So there's different departments involved. We invested in some tools when I came on board to make the processes more automated. We have sort of a risk assessment tool that we use for our deeper dives in our due diligence packages. We have a vendor that screens for restricted party screening, sanctions and watch lists. And so it's really kind of a holistic approach and a sliding scale of risk-based approach that we take. And we're currently in the training sessions for all the changes that we just made, and they're going very well. And we're also using technology to do that because we're all remote. So lots of movement on the Parsons side of the house, lots of sort of great stuff going on. But I think on the base level, it's all a risk-based approach in terms of what the relationship is and what we're engaging this third party to do.
Okay. So before moving over to Patricia, and Patricia, I'll ask you the same questions. For those of you who were in the prior session from Microsoft, there was some conversation about risk domains. Can you talk a little bit, Kim, about what are the risk domains that you are looking for when you talk about your channel partners? A lot of our third-party risk programs start with anti-bribery, but maybe you have expanded somewhat beyond that, or is this really an anti-bribery screening protocol that you are referring to?
So in my group, we look at the anti-bribery, we look at corruption risk, reputational risk to the company. We also trade rolls up through myself and legal. So we're looking at restricted party screenings, OFAC, sanctions, watch lists, all of those things. We have a global vendor that we use to do those screenings that screens not just US lists, but global lists, which we think is very important. We also have a pretty robust due diligence process around any tools that we onboard in vendors in the IT and cybersecurity space to look at risks there in terms of privacy. And then our procurement apparatus and department has a sort of supplier diversity and those types of programs through that. So we kind of hit it in a whole bunch of different ways. We have a risk chief risk officer, and our finance team that looks at the financial risks of certain engagements. So it's really kind of a holistic approach to projects and partners where, my team comes at it from a couple different directions, and then we have other folks assessing risk in other directions. So right. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of how we're approaching it.
So it does answer the question. I'd like to go into that in a little bit more detail, but I do want to move over to Patricia. Could you just answer the same question at a high level, describe your program, what the risk domains are and that are covered, and also what your processes are and who owns them?
So it's actually funny that when we're doing those panels, we actually hear about other people talking about their programs, and then you kind of thinking, oh, well, we're not so unique, right? We're very similar. So what Kim explained is actually very similar to what we do in some ways, meaning that it's the relationship with any third party is a relationship that we have with part of the business and the integrity function itself, meaning that it's not just the ethics and compliance team that is doing all the work and making sure that, we've vetted all of these vendors or business partners. This is actually usually initiated directly by the business, who will use a system that we have in place to do a scope check first to determine, is that just a normal vendor or is it a business partner? So someone that will act on our behalf of SNC-Lavalin directly. And then when it is considered as a business partner, then there is another step of the risk assessment that is being done, which obviously, like Kim, will look at, do we have previous experience with this business partner? Will they be any interaction with government official? Was it is this business partner recommended by a government official too? The purpose of the engagement for us is actually also very important. It will also determine, it is kind of a big portion of the score matrix that we have. And then obviously, depending on the country where we'll be executing the project, but also which country does this business partner come from, the compensation structure, and so on. And obviously, we go a bit more in details with an integrity search that we call, that will look at different topic is such as, is either the company, parent company, key people or key shareholders, let's say owners, are they like politically exposed people? Was there any regulatory issues related to any of them, either from corruption, antitrust, OFAC? Is it a state-owned company too? Because that has happened in the past too. So, state-owned, you'll have to manage it a bit differently. Is there even also social labor issues, such as, is there anything related to human rights, to modern slavery, discrimination, trafficking even? What about their supply chain that they are using? And obviously up to the sanction lists that are there. So following that, this will actually come to a different level of risk, and due diligence will be linked to it. So depending if it's a low, medium, or high risk, the due diligence will obviously a bit more stringent if it is an ENS risk, and then that is reflected also in our review system and approval system.
Great. So thank you. Let me go back to you, Kim. You made some references earlier to some of the changes that have taken place over the past year or so since you started in the position. Can you just describe how your program is better today than it was 2 years ago? What are the key improvements that you have made, and are they improvements in doing things, making things faster on an efficiency perspective, or are they improvements in terms of better identifying risk? So help us understand the nature of the improvement as well.
Sure. So I'm consider myself pretty fortunate. When I got to Parsons, I inherited a pretty robust system. We, at that point when I came on board, went through a pretty large corporate changes. So we acquired some companies, and we also went public. And so all of our improvements were to bolster what we already had, and then kind of pivot towards making sure that our controls were really tested and working well in light of SOX compliance, things of that nature. We're a lean organization, so when I first got there, the first thing that I did was link up with our CIO, who's been just a fantastic support, and automated a bunch of processes to really get that kind of administrative backlog that can exist in programs that are more manual or over email or those types of things, to kind of get that tools available to make things more efficient. I also added.
Interrupt you there for a second.
Sure.
Can you just elaborate a little bit when you said tools that were automated? Could you describe those in a bit of detail?
Sure. So out there in the ether, there are several vendors that are in this space, and I'm sure that most folks in the room might get LinkedIn messages from those people and whatnot. So we did a little shopping around. We wanted to invest in two things. We wanted a tool that was able to compile due diligence, sort of what I consider full scope reports. So something that looks at negative news, court filings, public records, politically exposed persons, all of those types of reputational things that are all split, most now are flying out of my mind, but a tool that really could aggregate that deeper dive. And then we also invested in a tool that was a restricted party screening tool that can run in the background, that is able to embed into our CLM, embed into, it's integratable with other systems we already had on board, so that, people can just enter a company name and it screens against US sanctions and watch lists, but also global sanctions and watch lists. And that tool, it was very important. One of our requirements was that it was a dynamic screening tool, so that it continuously ran. And if there was ever a change in that status, we would get notified about that partner. Because one of the things, especially in the DOJ guidance, is this continuous monitoring. And that can be very difficult when you have a smaller team to sort of, where do you set those intervals? So we wanted something that was a dynamic, real-time tool.
Great. Thank you. So let me move over to Patricia and ask you the same questions. Can you just highlight what for SNC-Lavalin were the significant improvements in your third-party program over the past year or two, or since you've taken over your position?
So first, we do have a tool where we actually do all the due diligence and risk assessment of our business partners. And what we've done is that in the past, when it started, people had to Google and do, their own search on, vendors and so on. And that's way not efficient. And so what we did is actually we kind of built a tool based on a database from a vendor, plus adding on our own reference list that we call. And that tool was integrated within our business partner due diligence tool. So now, technically, each time that they enter a name and they complete the due diligence, the tool would do the search itself, the integrity search itself on this company or key individuals. That tool is also on another platform where technically procurement, HR could use it. For any vendors, that's actually part of their process. For any vendors that they even finance, before they are putting in a vendor within the finance system, they have to go through an integrity search to see if there's any flags or not. And depending if there is a flag, if it is a medium risk flag or high risk, then they need either to come to contact the compliance assessment team that we've developed. It's kind of a shared service center out of India, or their integrity officers directly in the case that it's a high risk one. So there's everyone has access to it, whatever employees on our intranet. Also, that is linked with the ongoing monitoring tool. So in the past, what we had is that, people were receiving tons of emails popping saying there's a new article, there's something new, and so on. And what we've discovered is that people in the business that were receiving them stopped looking at them because they felt that it was just junk mail, right? So what we decided instead is that all of these hits would go directly to the compliance assessment team that we have now in India, and then they would assess it. And then if it was really a real risk that we need to look at, then it would be transferred directly to the integrity officer who would have to do his own review on it. So what we've done is, like I said, is develop that tool, but also change our process to also make sure that we would be more efficient. What we want to make sure is that the people in the business that are using our tool finds them meaningful, and that they could learn a lot on their third party that they're using for their project to do that, and not just adding up administrative things that they need to do, or else they're just going to try to skip it. So I think that it's everything that we've done is really to try as much as possible to automate things and making sure that there's a degree of intelligence that is also artificial intelligence that is also integrated in the search that we're doing. And then we've seen really a huge improvement. I mean, the delays to be able to do a due diligence, sometimes it could take months, and now, it could take just a couple of days to be done. And that is actually better from a compliance point of view, because as we see this happening, that means that they won't say, well, we're still going to sign a contract with them because, it takes so long. Now they know that it is quick enough that if they're doing the job right, everything is automated, the review would be done, then they could actually sign the contract without any risk issues after. And then they protect themselves and they protect the company too in their dealings.
Right, yeah.
We're actually trying to do more, by the way, because we kind of feel like it's still not enough. So we're looking right now to have more artificial intelligence in the reporting that we're doing relating to them.
So that is a nice segue, because really what I want to get into next is what are the next improvement areas. So I'll start with you, Patricia, since you opened the door to that, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about using more artificial intelligence. But what I'd like to get at is, artificial intelligence, screening using artificial intelligence or data analytics is a powerful tool, but somebody has got to write the algorithm. Somebody's got to design it. Is that something that you're involved in? What is your process for using these tools, or I should say designing these tools so they strike the right balance of identifying who has the which third parties really do require more review?
I think that what we're trying to do now is actually really simplify our process. But to be able to do that, we need to have, and I'm going to be really honest, we actually are looking to modify the system that we have in place to do the compliance due diligence now. We feel that the one that we have right now, we cannot move forward to be more agile with the business itself and their needs. So obviously we're in the process. So obviously we kind of revamped, we started with a blank canvas. What would be the ideal if I had to start over today? What would be the ideal process that we wanted to have? And this is actually great and awesome that I have that opportunity to do that, because then I don't have to fix something that is already there. I feel that that's what we've been doing for years now at a very high cost. And we never get into what we really wanted because we're still, limited with the tool that we have in place. So we're just really starting our entire process over. And what we're looking at is that our process would be linked to other processes that are already existing within the company, meaning that what we found is that people in procurement that have to go through this process, they don't want to go to one software to another. They just want to open their screen and then just work on it. So it's how we link everything together, and that they don't also have to enter the same data over and over again. What we've found also, just from looking at the past, is that people that were entering information about, example, an agent or a rep or a sponsor, they were entering it in the procurement system, they were entering it in the BD system and project approval system, then finance system, and then, hey, the integrity system too. So obviously that becomes very heavy, I think, for the business itself. But then if it is entered in one system and then linked directly to whatever due diligence that needs to be done, then it's actually even easier, and then everything is linked. So if there is a high risk, then automatically will be flagged through the finance system to procurement, to legal, to whoever is using it. So those are the things that we're looking at right now, that agility and flexibility to be able to bridge it to other systems that are already in place.
Great. I suspect that there are many in the audience that are on that journey at the same time with you. So Kim, same question for you. What improvements are you looking to incorporate into your program over the next couple of years?
So I think echoing the same, right? So leveraging technology in terms of linking to other pre-existing systems, embedding in those systems, that's key, and I think that's going to be continuous because we're always getting new tools in different places and making sure they all work together, so you're not, jumping from system to system. Aside from that, though, I think one of the things, we just made some policy and process improvements to make things more agile. The only way that I could do that really was to collaborate with procurement, with finance, with the business, to really get to their needs, right? Because a lot of times compliance is slows everything down. It's, you have to clear it through compliance, clear it through legal. It's going to take forever. Like Patricia was saying, it used to take months. It used to be on email. It used to be through Google. We really partner with the business to do a couple of things, to design an efficient process where we can turn things around in days instead of months. But also in terms of improving like our workflows and automated tools. We collaborate on that to make sure it makes sense for everybody. And in terms of monitoring, same thing. When we look at sort of our agents, for example, and we're looking at their activity reports that they turn in every month, and the people that need to see that, are we designing a workflow that's not over email, that, can we automate those things to make sure everyone gets to see what they need? So I think pushing further into automation tools and efficiencies is really where my head is right now going forward. And I think, especially since we're all working remotely and virtually for now, and maybe for the foreseeable future for some of us, that's going to be super helpful. But I think where I'm coming from is really looking at the business as our partner, and not having us be so much of a gate as we are a helping hand to get them where they want to go as quickly as we can.
So let me just ask you to go into a little bit more on the point you made on automation. So when you were talking earlier about insisting that the vendor, I think you had for screening checks, that it was dynamic, so that it would alert you automatically to any changes. But now you're also talking about looking at what your agents are doing and on an ongoing basis to see if there are any flags that come up. How can you describe what are your plans to automate that type of review? Because not like a sanctions review where the sanctions list gets updated and you just run it against the updated list. That can be automated. But if you're looking at your agents and what they're doing, how do you go about automating that?
I think for us, it's really about automating the workflow, right? So if an agent, the agent has a sponsor in the business who's sort of the point of contact for day-to-day management of what they're working on and with whom. And then every month they send in their invoice, and with that they have to send in a report of what they've been doing for us. The invoice needs to be sufficiently detailed and broken out. So we look for anything that looks odd on the invoices. And then the activity report that comes with it, we make sure that it falls within the scope of work of what they've been hired to do, that it's in the markets they were hired to do it in, and that there is no kind of outside off the normal course of business activities. So those go to the business partner sponsor. They then come through my shop to make sure that it all looks right, and then it goes to finance. So we've got gates there, and what I don't know that there's a way to really automate the person looking at those activity reports, but you can certainly automate the workflow so it's not email to email to email kind of thing. So we're looking at making some of those things easier for folks and taking the administrative burden off a little bit.
And maybe this is a question for both of you, but if you're having teams of people who are, let's say, you have an owner for a particular agent, and the agent is submitting an invoice, it has to be reviewed for all the things that you just mentioned. How are you ensuring that review process is being handled by people who are adequately trained to know what to look for? What is your role in the training? I'll start with you, Cam, and then go to you, Patricia.
So we train, we give anti-corruption training and agent training to all of our BD market leads and their reports on all of these types of issues. We're actually in the middle of a cycle of training right now. So I've been using WebEx to do those trainings so that they're interactive. And then we're also recording them and putting them on our ethics page at the end of that so that the decks are easily accessible and the recording is easily accessible as well. I also we've made several sessions available to folks so they can pick one that best fits their schedule, which we have a lot of business in the Middle East and we have business in the US all the way to the West Coast. So I'm doing some in the very early morning and some in the afternoon. And, And then I also, will go to, for example, our aviation sector said, can you come and do a training just for us? Sure. So we'll do that too. So we just try to hit people, every way we can, and make sure they understand why we're doing these things, that it's not, we're not trying to micromanage your relationship. We're not, interested in telling you, like, don't let him go to that meeting, whatever. It's really, there's a reason for it. Here's why we do this. And we sort of walk them through what the regulators expect, and also kind of, a little bit of the scared straight stories about what can happen at companies. 90% of FCPA enforcement actions involve the use of third parties. And this is why we really need to manage those relationships and really stay on top of those engagements. So, and they, they understand it. So,
Patricia, same question for you.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that the people who you are relying on in the business to do the ongoing screening and monitoring really know what to look for?
So obviously there's the training. So as Kim does, we also do training, anti-corruption training to folks, technically in person, but now virtually, obviously for a lot of reasons. But that's not all we do. We discovered that was not enough. So what we've done is that we look through, we use HR actually, and look through the job classification categories. And what we did is that we assess what type of role would be involved with third parties. And then what we did is that we did an e-learning training that is specifically on business partner. So these individuals received the training in that sense. And then there's actually also a tutorial that is there available for them to know how to use the tool exactly. And what we've done this year that we've launched in May and that they have until end of July to do is that we actually did a refresher to make sure that, 2 years after, do you still remember the things that you need to be aware of, how the process works and so on, what are your responsibilities in it. So that is done right now. The other thing also that we've done is that we actually have a compliance control framework. So we do testing each year to see what's working and what's not working. And obviously there's internal audit that is providing their own tests, and we have some monitors that also doing their own tests. So all of this, what we do is actually we also address each time what are the things that are not working as well as they should be. And one of the things that we found is that where we were a bit more at risk now was involving reporting or paying agents or sponsors or reps that didn't go through the process. So what we did is that we look into it, and now we are talking to IT to look at, I think we have like 14 different finance system within the company, and how can we add a couple of things within their system to make sure that we could block some payments, and how can we link that directly to our tool. So we're already in the process of doing that to make sure that we are taking the payments to rep and sponsors that might be a bit more tricky, and try to protect ourselves. So I think that training is, the first line of defense, but you really need to have, internal controls in place that are strong enough to be able to see if there's any concerns or anything that doesn't work, smells fishy, that you're able to react on it immediately.
Ray, I can see that from both of you that working across different systems is a challenge that we all face. So
Totally.
Let me stop here and see if there are some questions, because we have, I guess, about 8 minutes left, and I do see that we have some questions. I'm going to some questions. So I see that some of them have been answered, but so One of the questions that comes from Nicholas is that often when you're dealing with conducting due diligence, it does require asking for and processing some sometimes sensitive information, but obviously personal information, which then gets into some data privacy concerns. And how have you, what changes, if any, have you had to make in order to ensure that your due diligence protocols are compliant with your privacy obligations? And maybe we could start with you, Kim.
Sure. So, the US is kind of interesting because we don't have one privacy law. We've got 50, right? So it's difficult. And we have a bit of business in Europe, a lot of business in the Middle East, and a fair amount of business in Canada. So the approach we took internally a couple years ago was to get ready for the GDPR. And then after that, the CCPA, which is the California law that was, anyone that followed that, it was sort of bouncing around with amendments, and no one really, there was a carve out and an extension and all kinds of, we just got ready for it. We just decided to accept it the way it was written, got ready for it. So we engaged in data mapping. We made sure that we had all the requisite notices out. We made sure we had a mechanism by which people could request to exercise their right to be forgotten or deleted. We tried to harmonize it from sort of the highest risk kind of what's the most sort of complex privacy law, and work backwards and hope we caught the rest of it up in that. And we also made changes to our sort of due diligence questionnaires and forms to make sure that we were really only asking the things that we needed, that we had a business justification to ask for, to sort of pare down what information do we really need to collect. And then we made sure that, as we do with our personal employee data and other data we collect, that everything is handled appropriately, is mapped appropriately, and is encrypted when it needs to be. So that was a really big undertaking that luckily a lot of that happened before I got here. But we still continue to make those improvements, and it's very complicated, especially with GDPR. I think that there's a lot of scholarship out there where the answer is no one knows the answer yet, right? In terms of how you collect what you need to collect while balancing those interests. It's a difficult. I'll be interested to see how that's tested. But we're doing, I think, the best we can with the various patchworks of laws and regulations that are out there.
Patricia, same question for you.
Yeah. Obviously, like Kim explained, we also had to go and do a thorough assessment. We actually created the team that is only focus is on data privacy management and making sure to review all of our process that we had in place. Obviously, it was firstly done mostly on employees at first, and then after that on every third party that we have. I would say that the information that we collect from our third parties are actually most of the time already public information that we could find. So obviously, if it is a company that would there's any findings, those findings would actually be through either public records or media that could be found anywhere, so and available for everyone. Other information that we're gathering, I think it's more sensitive when it's related directly to an individual consultant, meaning that it's, the information that we're getting in is more on the individual itself. So those obviously we're being more careful on what we're gathering and also what we do with that information. So that information actually within their system is not available to all, meaning that everyone could do the integrity check, but once they want to go and have access to a compliance due diligence from any business partner, they would have to ask permission to be able to go on it. So, and that permission is not necessarily for life. So we really are careful about that too.
Fantastic. I think we have just 2 minutes left, and tell me if I'm mistaken, Chelsea, but uh, at a very high level, Kim, what impact has COVID-19 had on your program that's not just on the training? Because you talked about having to do trainings remotely. Is there anything else where you've had to adapt your third-party risk program because of the pandemic?
I think our program actually on the third-party reviews, because so much work had slowed down, we actually saw a drop in requests for third-party reviews. And then now that things are kind of opening back up, the floodgates are kind of open, so people are starting to work again. So for us, it was more of a numbers thing. We were pivoting already to a lot of new tools and virtual, capabilities and automated risk assessments. So we just continue on that path. So I think COVID itself really just affected workload for a little bit. But we were already sort of going down this automated path. And I think it just has shown us how important that is to keep our foot on the gas on that, and really also look at, analytics and controls and tightening those things up while we're all working over computers.
So actually, I think that we are really just at time. I want to thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Kim, for sharing with the audience about your programs and what steps you've taken to improve it. I found it very interesting. I'm sure the audience did as well. Thank you all.